Do you feel particularly angry about an issue? Well, why not add your name on the government's e-petition website and get a debate in Parliament? That's the theory, but some feel this latest attempt by politicians to be more accountable just isn't working. More than 140,000 people have signed an e-petition calling for British justice for a terrorism suspect who's been held for 7 years without charge. The campaigners are angry that it won't be the subject of a full Commons debate. And the MP who chairs the Backbench Business Committee tells us she fears the e-petition system may have created a false expectation. Our political correspondent Carol Walker reports.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Supporters of Babar Ahmed have fought a long campaign to bring his case before the British courts. He's been held without charge for 7 years since he was arrested by anti-terrorist officers in South London and is challenging extradition to the United States, where he could be jailed for life.
This is the issue of a man's life and liberty, and not just one man, but it's an issue which affects every British citizen who might find himself in a similar situation.
Fahad Ansari from the Free Babar Ahmed campaign thought they'd achieved a major breakthrough when their e-petition got 100,000 signatures, the threshold for a parliamentary debate. But the committee of MPs in charge of allocating time made it part of a wider discussion on extradition, without a vote, in the Commons side chamber, Westminster Hall, this Thursday.
There's an assurance on the petition website saying this is a way for the public to influence government policy. For them to suddenly dismiss it in this manner and just say, well, you'll have your discussion in Westminster Hall, which anybody who knows anything about Parliament knows it makes no difference whatsoever to the issue. It just shows the level of disrespect which the government has shown to 141,000 people.
So, if you go onto the e-petitions website, as I am now, it says it's an easy way for you to influence government policy in the UK. But it is rather more complex than that. Reaching the 100,000 signature threshold merely triggers a letter from the Leader of the House to the Backbench Business Committee. It has to juggle competing issues with the handful of slots it's allocated in Parliament.
We're now coming on to the next debate, and I've got to tell the House that no amendments have been selected. Mr Robert Halfon, fuel prices.
Mr Halfon won the overwhelming backing of MPs in that debate prompted by an e-petition last week. The petition called on the government to scrap the 4p fuel duty increases due next year. But the motion debated by MPs merely asked the government to consider ways of reducing the price at the pumps. Peter Carroll from the Fair Fuel campaign says he'll judge whether it's been worthwhile when the Chancellor makes his autumn statement next week.
We are hoping that he has listened to the pressure from those backbenchers and will stand up and say that the 3p rise in January is scrapped. If he doesn't, I fear that people will look at the e-petition system in its entirety and say, well, it didn't work. And that will be very, very damaging to the government and to Parliament.
That expectation of a change of policy can rarely be achieved through an e-petition. Natasha Engel, the Labour MP whose committee allocates these debates, warns they might not achieve the greater public engagement with Parliament that the government had hoped for.
There's a real danger that it's having exactly the opposite effect, that every time 100,000 signatures is reached and something doesn't happen immediately, then people get very disappointed because of this false expectation. And that would be such a pity when you've got potentially so many people engaging with Parliament at a level that they have never engaged with us before.
Government sources say the fact that the e-petitions website has attracted more than 2.6 million signatures for various different campaigns shows it is helping to connect the politicians and the people. But it won't help the standing of Parliament if those that sign up don't believe the exercise has made much difference.
Carol Walker there. We're joined now by Sir George Young, Leader of the House of Commons. And Sir George, you said when this scheme was launched that it was a way of giving the public a megaphone. But do you agree with Natasha Engel there that there is a risk of giving rise to false expectations?
Well, I think it's important to put this in perspective. As you say, 2.6 million people have now been able to sign an e-petition. And one of the best debates we've had in this Parliament was the debate on Hillsborough, where the government listened to the petition and then we released the documents that were being asked for. So I think that the e-petitions is helping to build a bridge between Parliament and people, and it has generated some really interesting debates, and at times debates that have been difficult for the government.
Well, certainly, yes. I mean, that was certainly the case over Europe, wasn't it? And that's given rise to the suspicion that perhaps the government might like to water down this scheme because it is giving rise to backbench rebellions.
Certainly not. This is part of a strategy which the coalition government has of giving back to Parliament some of the power which the executive has taken away over recent years. That's why we're now electing Select Committee chairman, and it's why the Backbench Business Committee now has the right to fix the agenda for Parliament for roughly 1 day per week.
On the question of e-petitions, though, are you committed to keeping this threshold of 100,000 people?
Well, we're not reviewing that threshold at the moment. And again, if you put it in perspective,
very firm.
Well, so far 6 petitions have gone through the 100,000 threshold. 3 have already had a debate, and a 4th is having a debate later this week. And I hope it'll be possible to find time for the remaining 2 between now and the end of the session. So it isn't the case that the 100,000 threshold is causing enormous difficulties.
But then you have people raising 140,000 signatures, we heard there about Babar Ahmed, and they don't get a full Commons debate. And in fact, their motion is in Westminster Hall and subsumed into a larger debate about extradition.
I think it's important to distinguish between the role of the government and the role of the Backbench Business Committee. The government set up the e-petition website, and we said that any petition that gets 100,000 will be eligible for a debate, and when it hits the threshold, I pass that over to Natasha Engel's committee, and I applaud what Natasha and her committee have done to help get e-petitions going. It's then up to the Backbench Business Committee, firstly to decide whether the debate's in Westminster Hall or in the chamber, secondly whether it's a take-note debate or whether it's a debate with a substantive motion.
But people signing those e-petitions think they're going to get a full Commons debate, and that's where the issue of raised expectations comes.
The whole idea is for the government to give power back to Parliament, and it would be quite wrong if it was the government that set the motions for these e-petitions. And we've passed that over to the Backbench Business Committee, which is elected by members of Parliament to decide, firstly, the forum in which the debate takes place, and secondly, whether or not there's a substantive motion. And there was a substantive motion last week on fuel. We've had substantive motions on referendum, on contaminated blood, on votes for prisoners. So it isn't the case that these are simply take-note debates. They're often substantive debates with votes.
Sir George Young, many thanks.